In this video, we will talk about writing field notes. And by field notes, I mean the notes that you write down when you are doing observation research. And field notes then constitute the data that you have for your research. In the same way that your notes from an interview or audio recording from an interview would be when you're doing interview research. When it comes to writing field notes, there's a couple of decisions that you need to take. First of all, how will you write the field notes? Will you write using pen and paper? Will you write them using your laptop or your smartphone? Decision that is made partly on personal preferences, but also based on when you are writing down your field notes. Are you writing them during observation, or are you writing them down after the actual observation? In certain settings, sitting with a pen and paper would be perfectly normal, whereas if you would take out your laptop and start typing, that would feel disturbing, or you would feel maybe out of place, or you would maybe attract a lot of unnecessary attention to yourself. So whether you write down your field notes during or after observation depends a lot on what is possible and your own role. As we'll see on the next slide, there are different types of field notes that you can write, and you might write certain types during observation and other types of field note after observation. And then of course you have to select what you write down, because you cannot write down everything that happens in the setting where you are observing. And what you write down depends, of course, on the research questions that you have, the focus of your research project. But you might also, in a qualitative project, be open for the unexpected. You might not know exactly what you are going to write down, exactly what you will observe before you have started observing. So sometimes doing qualitative research is also about kind of diving into the unknown, starting, observing, looking, thinking, and finding a path and a focus as you learn more about your research setting, about what goes on there, and as you find things that are interesting to observe in more detail. But you might want to try to get as rich and detailed descriptions as possible, because when you leave the observation setting and start on a more focused analysis process and then start writing your analysis and discussion chapters, a longer period of time might have passed. It might have been that several weeks or months since you were actually doing the observation. And if you have field notes with just a couple of keywords scribbled down, you might not remember exactly what you meant by those keywords that felt very obvious to you when you wrote them down, but 2 months later they just feel like scribblish. You don't understand your own writing. So try to write as detailed field notes as possible. It could be wise to report what people said, maybe using some small direct quotes. You probably will not be able to write down everything that people said, but maybe there's some key expressions or key sentences that people say that you want to write down because they feel significant. You might also, when you write field notes, include your own analysis, thoughts, and reflections. And this can be done in several ways. I mean, you can write, if you're using a pen or paper or a Word document on your laptop, you can simply divide the document into 2 columns or maybe 3 columns. One column where you write down what you observe. Another column where you write down your analysis and reflections, and this doesn't have to be a very thorough analysis. It can just be ideas that you have, observations, something that seems like this is important. I need to understand this better. It can be also small comments to yourself. And then you could also potentially include a 3rd column where you might want to include more like pointers to yourself. I need to ask questions about this to the manager. This is something I want to follow up in the next observation session. This is also relevant for this. like small things that you want to follow up during future observation sessions. So 1, 2, or 3 columns in your field notes in order to be able to write down not just what you see and observe, but also your own reactions to what is happening in the field. We can distinguish between different types of field notes. This is one way of one type of distinction between mental notes, jotted notes, and full field notes. By mental notes, I mean that you don't actually write anything down. You just make a note for yourself in your head that this is something I need to remember. This is important. This feels significant. I don't know exactly why, but it feels important. And mental notes are particularly useful when it's inappropriate to take notes, or where you don't have time to take notes, or you simply don't have pen and paper available. That you just note down in your head that this is something important. Then a second type, or a second level almost, of field notes is jotted note or scratch notes. These are brief notes that you write down on any kind of paper that you have available in a small notebook. Could be just keywords, key sentences that will just help you later to remember what happened. So they're meant to trigger your memory about event, and that you should, if you write jotted notes, write them up more in detail later. And jotted notes, as I said, use any kind of paper. People have been using toilet paper, tissue paper, anything that's available. Maybe if you're using your phone, you want to include you want to have a small note app on your phone. Anything that works for you and works in the setting where you're doing observation. And then the last type or last level is full field notes. Probably you will not be able to write full field notes as you're observing. But you should make it a habit, once you're kind of stepping out of the observation setting, as soon as possible, sit down and make detailed notes, because these will be your main data source in your research project. Write them down, write them out as full as possible, as soon as possible, as your memory is still fresh, as you still remember all the tiny details that we so easily forget as time passes. I will close this video by including an example of field notes, just to kind of exemplify or illustrate how field notes could look like. And this example is taken from a textbook in research methods called Qualitative Research and Evaluation Methods. And if you're doing observation, I encourage you to check out this book. It also includes some other examples of field notes that can be useful if you're new to observation research and you wonder how on earth do I actually write these field notes. And I've included here, both on the left hand side, the kind of more minimalistic form of field notes that just includes like a key summary of what happened. Let's imagine that you're observing an interaction between a client and a staff person, and you just write down the client was quite hostile toward the staff person. And looking at this sentence 2 months after you did the observation, it helps you to remember, okay, who were present in this situation, the client and the staff person, what kind of relationship was there. Yes, there was some hostility, but you don't really get a lot more of detail. If, however, you write more detailed field notes, like the example on the right hand side, you can, to a large extent, get help to trigger your memory about what happened in this situation. And you also have a much richer data set to analyze. A more detailed description could, for instance, be when Judy, the senior staff member, told the client that she could not just do whatever she wanted to, the client began to yell, screaming that Judy couldn't control her life, accused Judy of being on a power trip, and said that she'd like to beat the shit out of her, then told her to go to hell. The client shook her fist in Judy's face and stomped out of the room, leaving Judy standing there with her mouth open, looking amazed. So you see here that in this detailed description, the author has included not just who was present and the kind of relationship between them, but also some quotes: power trip, beat the shit out of her, go to hell, And these are marked with quotation marks. And also more detailed information about what happened during this interaction between the client and the staff person. So I hope that's been useful in order to help you understand what field notes are all about in observation research.